We continue our reading through the Gospel of Luke. We are in chapter 20 today, and I'm coming at you from the dining room table in the Turner household. Elijah Turner is staring at me right now because he is on the other side of this phone doing math. And Miles is a little bit down the table doing reading and writing because school is in session for like 1 hour of the day. But we are studying Luke chapter 20, and here we made it to Jerusalem. Jesus has entered Jerusalem. He's cleansed the temple. He's in the temple daily teaching. And in chapter 20, we really see the tension between Jesus and the religious authorities build. And because of this tension that is put on display, we see how necessary faith really is. These religious leaders, this establishment of Judaism is learned. They know all the Bible verses. They grew up in synagogue and in the temple. They know what to do with every festival and ceremony, and they can quote the law, and they do all the right things according to the letter, but their hearts are far from God. They lack faith, and they don't recognize Emmanuel, God incarnate, the Messiah, when they see him. In verse 20, it starts off with this conflict between Jesus and the Pharisees and the scribes and these religious leaders of the day. In verses 1 through 8, we see here in this first encounter where they want to know, what authority do you do these things? And Jesus says, hey, let me ask you a question. Was the baptism of John from heaven or from men? And they're like, we're not going to touch that because whatever answer we give, it's not going to be good for us. And so Jesus says, I'm not going to tell you, even though he's been telling everybody all the way through his ministry. If you have open eyes, you can see it through faith. Jesus has been saying where his authority comes from. But we can see here in verses 1 through 8 that wisdom and authenticity trump hypocritical cleverness every time. Jesus is using wisdom, and he's been authentic. He's never played a part. He's never tried to manipulate people. He's never used his position and his authority as an advantage to himself. He has been seeking and saving the lost. He's been serving the poor. He has been healing. He has been putting his credentials on display for anyone who's got eyes to see and ears to hear. But the Pharisees have hardened their hearts. They've closed their ears. They've covered their eyes, and they refuse to put their faith in Christ because they care far too much for the opinions of people. As we go on, Jesus gives us this parable, verses 9 through 18, and it's really a warning to the Pharisees and scribes. They rightly conclude that Jesus is talking about them in this parable. They're the ones who reject the landowner's representatives and beat and kill his son. They're the ones whom the cornerstone falls on and crushes, and they're scattered to dust. That's them. They know that Jesus is talking about them. And just a note into verse 18, it says that everyone who falls on that stone will be broken to pieces, but on whomever it falls, it will scatter him like dust. This is, you come to Christ through faith, or you acknowledge who Christ is because of judgment. And the religious leaders, they're the ones who are crushed. We who put our faith in Christ, we're broken, but remade, right? Whoever's in Christ, we are a new creation. The old is gone, the new has come. 2 Corinthians 5:17. But it's a warning that judgment awaits if you reject Christ. And look, this is especially serious for them because they're literally in the presence of a physical Jesus. For them to reject him and reject putting their faith in him. Then in verses 19 through 26, we get this question. So the religious leaders, they're like, all right, let's get sneakier. And they send people in to act like they're, oh yeah, Jesus, you're so great. Well, hey, we have a question. They ask him what they think this question is going to trap him, because the Jews did not like Rome. They did not appreciate Rome. If Jesus says, yeah, we need to obey Rome, then that is not, that is going to put some shame on him publicly. But Jesus answers their question. He sees through them, and he sees that they're not coming to him in faith. They're coming in pride. They're seeking status and honor. They're playing the same old games. And Jesus says this question, hey, whose image is this on the coin? They're like, Caesar's. We'll give to Caesar what's Caesar's and give to God what is God's. And he rises above it. And this is such a profound and deep statement. And Ravi Zacharias, someone whom I've listened to for years, has always, whenever he talks about this encounter, always says, what if they had then asked, what belongs to God? And that's kind of the question we're left asking. Okay, well, the coin belongs to Caesar, but what belongs to God? What has God's image on it? We do. We belong to God. And so we are to give ourselves to him. But that was lost on the Pharisees. Then we go to verses 27 through 40. We get into this like technical religious debate. So the Sadducees and the Pharisees are two competing groups within Judaism's religious establishment. And the Sadducees don't believe there's a resurrection of the dead. And that's it. And the Pharisees do. And so the Sadducees come to Jesus with this scenario. And they're like, oh, we're going to get him here. There's no way he can get out of this. The scenario is based on a false premise that the afterlife is just like a heightened earth-like experience. But they're asking about resurrection. So this is some foreshadowing here. So Jesus makes sure, Luke makes sure to highlight this, because what is going to happen a few chapters down the road? Jesus is going to be resurrected. He asserts that there is a resurrection, and he does so with some excellent interpretation, paying attention to all the details that are given to us in the Old Testament. God's the God of the living, not of the dead. And he gives us some insight into what heaven is like, in that the church is the bride of Christ. It's not just this heightened earth-like experience. We're like the angels, not that we become angels, but we're like them in that we don't get married anymore. We don't have kids because there's no death. Angels are asexual. They're not male and female. And in heaven, it's going to be like that for us as well. It's not that we become angels, it's that we're similar to them, in that in heaven we're the bride of Christ, and there's no marrying. We're not having kids because there's no more death anymore. But then Jesus goes into verses 41 through 44, and he asks this question about, well, how can the Messiah be, and he says the Christ, which again is the Greek way to say Messiah. He says, how can the Christ be David's son, but also David's Lord? And here he's talking about the incarnation, that Jesus is David's son because he's from the line of David. You can trace him back through his earthly parents, but he is also David's Lord because he's God incarnate. He's God in the flesh. He has the divine nature and the human nature perfectly unified and joined together in one person. And so he's pointing to that reality, again, from their Old Testament scriptures. Of course, they didn't call it the Old Testament then, but from their scriptures. And I see in here that Jesus is, he's giving them warnings, he's pleading with them, he's speaking to their language to them. When I look at Jesus interacting in the Gospels, I always see him offering a way. Offering, look, if you would just believe, look, here's all the evidence. Look, here you go. Here's evidence so you can take a step of faith to believe in me. He's speaking their language to them. But verses 45 through 47, Jesus plainly says the MO of the scribes and Pharisees is to take advantage of others for their own status and for their own honor. There are actually recorded stories through history we have of Pharisees, fundraising, soliciting donations from individuals to support their own ministries. And sometimes they would do so through like giving They told this one couple that the Herod was going to die and that they would become, the new ruler of, that region, which is ridiculous, right? But they did that so they could get people's money, and apparently they were going after widows, and they were taking advantage of in others to support themselves. And we see Jesus is doing the opposite. And so chapter 20, it begins and it ends with this tension and this contrast between Jesus, the Messiah, God incarnate, the Son of Man who came to seek and to save that which was lost, and the religious establishment who has rejected the Messiah, rejected faith, and seeks their own advantage and to prop themselves up on the backs of others. And many times that's the poor, the disadvantaged, the marginalized, the down and out, the outcasts. So, for us, we read chapter 20 and we're in Jerusalem. We're getting near Jesus' death. What about for us for chapter 20? And I go back to this question, this statement in verse 25, where Jesus says, "Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." And what belongs to God? Well, I do. We do. We bear the image of God. Because we are a special creation of His. We are not time plus matter plus chance. We are intentionally and purposely created by God in His image for a purpose. Set apart for His goodwill and His good pleasure. And that affects everything about our lives. And so I just ask the question, okay, if all of me belongs to God, what parts of me have I not submitted to Him and surrendered to Him? What am I still clinging to? Where am I still being selfish? Where am I seeking advantage to make myself look better? Where am I still depending on my own efforts? Where am I not having faith in Christ? Where am I not following through in faith? These are the questions that I'm asking, and they're very good questions for us to ask as followers of Jesus. Tomorrow we get into chapter 21, and it starts with a beautiful story that, again, if you grew up in Sunday school, you know this one. But I'm excited about that, so keep on reading, and I will see you tomorrow.